Hi everyone. Today we are going to talk about the Fukushima wastewater release off the coast of Japan. So I'm Julia Gardner, I'm part of Planet Number 2, and I'm joined by Una Cruikshank, Michelle Jang, and Vivian Webster. So a little bit of background about the issue. In 2011, there was an earthquake and resulting tsunami that hit the Fukushima power plant and damaged multiple receptors, releasing radiation and contaminating some water. And so the Japanese officials have been holding this wastewater in tanks and continually treating it to try to lessen that radiation. And recently in August, they have started releasing the water into the oceans off the coast of Japan, sparking a lot of controversy surrounding this issue, as they say that the research shows that the radiation levels are now safe, but other countries such as China are skeptical and have placed bans on all imports of Japanese fish and marine products, while other countries such as South Korea trust the research conducted and believe that this is a safe and effective method. So we're here to discuss the implications this has for our planet. And my first question is, what do y'all think is the effect of such a decision?
I feel like our oceans and all of the ecosystems within them are just so important to literally everything on Earth. Primarily all the fish and marine life that live in them. Obviously that's the most direct consequence, but also we get so much oxygen from the reefs and there are all these keystone species in the ocean, and I feel like if we disturb that, if we interfere with it, then that can just have such disastrous consequences for the planet and also for us,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, specifically in the Pacific Ocean and sort of the outskirts of the Indian Ocean where this has been taking place. It's we've seen what's been going on with the Great Barrier Reef in Australia. I used to live right by it, and and it's not doing too hot. So I think we actually really need to pay attention to what's going on in the Pacific and what we allow to get in that water, or what other countries allow to get in that water. So yeah.
So the United Nations environmental agency, I think the IAEPA, has delegated that this water is safe according to their standards, but however some researchers disagree, and they don't believe that enough research has been conducted, that maybe the levels of radiation are safe and dilute enough, but we don't know any long-term effects. We don't know maybe this constant low rate of radiation, what that can do to the environment. So the Japanese are monitoring the fish daily, but monitoring the fish, what happens when we identify a problem? We can't reverse that. And so many researchers are concerned that we are being too brave, too confident to release this water, and what if there are long-term effects from this continued release of low radiation, and as it builds up, what are we going to do when we have that problem and we can't turn back?
I think especially this is very unfamiliar. It's kind of uncharted territory, because obviously there haven't been a lot of really major nuclear disasters, and Fukushima is the only really situation I know of where there's such a big issue with contaminated wastewater. And so I feel like you said, we won't know until we do it what the actual cost of that will be in the oceans and on the planet, the whole environment.
Mm-hmm.
I would agree with Una in that you can't really predict what will happen to the environment given so vague of studies of some arguing that it's perfectly safe and others arguing that it's still a relatively low level of radiation. But I do think there could have been a different method to handle the disposing of the water. It seems unreasonable to put the water back after not being 100% sure, and the water dissipates, and then the fish, and
Because something I've seen is there's actually a panel between several countries in the Pacific Islands, including Japan, when they were going to talk about different ways to handle this situation, and one of the alternatives, I don't know if y'all have talked about this already, but was actually mixing it into concrete, which is so interesting because based on whatever research they've done, they found that when that wastewater is released into concrete, all of the, I think it's like carbon-14 isotopes, the beta radiation, all of that is very like subdued, and the amount of radiation that would be released by that is minimal or none. Like, it wouldn't be picked up even on a Geiger counter, so it would be safe to use. And Japan uses, I don't remember the number, but it's like about as much concrete as the United States. They need a lot of concrete. And so it could go towards that, but what I find super interesting is that it could also go toward, like, one of the other solutions is that they could use that concrete to actually support the plant itself and help kind of regulate that. Like, I know in Chernobyl, for example, there in like, I want to say it was like 2010, but it might have been earlier than that. I don't really remember. They built a big containment facility called like a sarcophagus around the reactor. And so people have talked about maybe using some of that concrete for good in the Fukushima plant too, which I think is like such a cool solution.
Yeah, that's an awesome idea.
I think
Yeah.
that's really cool. And I think like the major thing concerning what to do with the water is that even though it's uncharted territory, like, we can't afford to take that risk.
Exactly.
So we don't have like documented like sort of evidence as to see like what it would do, and hopefully we never will, just because we don't want, like, we can't take that risk to see what happens.
Exactly.
So I think it's better to take the safer alternative and use that like thing with the concrete to support
Yeah.
the
And
plant.
also, like, did you have something to say?
No. Sorry. Keep going.
And also, like, jumping off of that, there has been like humongous public resistance, like many protests and like full countries like disagreeing with this plan. So what do y'all think about like such a decision being implemented even amongst this like public protest?
I think some of them are slightly comical. So, for example, like a lot of Chinese products are branded as Japanese products because of like the culture in America, and like there's like this whole counter movement now where a lot of products have specific labels where like this fish comes from Australia. We don't support the import of like fish from Japan, and that is just like a slightly more comical outlook to me personally.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think it. I mean, obviously, I don't. They're definitely short on alternatives. I don't know exactly like all the implications, like I said, of the concrete thing. I don't really know a whole lot more of it, except that it was discussed and tested, and a lot of researchers have a lot of hope for it. But basically, I think that it's irresponsible for the Japanese government to do something that has such a ginormous impact on the planet without putting like as much investment as possible into alternatives, despite all these other countries and activists and just people who care about the environment.
It's a very sticky situation
Yeah.
because it's like there's research that supports this is safe, but then there's also research that supports that it isn't, and there's a lot of this like controversy, and no one really knows the correct answer. Like the generally accepted answer like by the UN is that it should be safe, but then there's that should involved.
Yeah, like we can't take that risk.
So, yeah. Going into Planet Number 2's mission. So, our mission as the club is to call on public awareness to this issue. So, what are y'all's thoughts on, like, sharing this issue and, like, what we can do?
I think that, you know, I mean, I know it's been very publicized, especially recently, and like you said, there have been a lot of protests, especially concentrated in Asia, but I think that it's not necessarily an issue that like everybody knows about, everybody cares about, and I feel like with more pressure, the Japanese government is more likely to consider alternatives, and that is a good course of action for us to take, is to try to, you know, spread more awareness and encourage more people to pressure the government of Japan otherwise.
And like especially with how like globalized our economy is, like as we like trade, like such like resources from these waters, like every nation is going to be affected by this, not just East Asia, if there are implications. So it's important to make the entire globe aware of this. So.
Yeah, I'm glad we're like doing this because I think that like as a generation, social media is the most valuable asset as for like getting information out there. So in order to spread awareness among like our people and people who will care about this and want to foster change in this, I think this is the way to go about it. So the question goes to how do we get it like from this like small scale thing that probably won't reach that many people to something that would pressure the Japanese government. Like how would we go about that?
I don't know if like, sorry, you can go.
Oh, sure.
Like I think us like as high schoolers, I'm not sure how much we can do to like pressure the Japanese government, but I think like doing our own part in spreading awareness of this and getting more people involved, we can work together. Like it takes a lot of people, a lot of resistance, not just like an individual to get stuff like this done. So we all need to like remember that even though we can only contribute a small amount, if we all do it, it's going to be a big amount in the end, and it's going to have an impact, and it's going to make a difference.
Yeah.
So, any last like questions or comments to make? All right, I think this was great. Thank you all for participating.
Thank you, Julia.